Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. And I'm George Binns. And this evening we're going to talk a little bit about the school committee, and to help us understand what's really going on there, Lorinda Visnick has joined us.
Thank you for having me.
And she's the Ward 6 school committee member. So we talked a few days ago about what's going on, and I guess the big action is going to be the budget, and that's going to suck up a lot of time and questions. So besides the budget, what else is going on with the school committee?
Well, we would really like to hope that we can walk and chew bubble gum.
Yeah.
So we can do more than one thing at a time. This time of year is always budget. We're also, every meeting people call it keeping the trains running, right?
Yeah.
So what do? Every single meeting, we do curriculum review, some little subsection of curriculum review, and relatively recently we had a lot of public participation because we talked about making some changes in the math area. So those discussions are still going on. We've, based on the public feedback, the proposed changes have been modified. So we're continuing to work on.
What are these changes going to be?
The change was around when we look at our disaggregated data, when we see in the math program is that we have very little participation from our subgroups in the advanced math, we'll call it a pathway, you could call it a track maybe. We have very few children from our subgroups reaching calculus and AP Calc in particular.
Yeah.
And so when we kind of roll that backwards and try to look at why is that, we are tracking children coming out of 6th grade, and we put them in one of two tracks. And if you're we think you're good at math, which is a really early age to decide whether you're good at math or not, we put you in a track that over the course of 7th and 8th grade, you take 7th grade, what the Department of Ed would tell you is 7th grade math, 8th grade math, and pre-algebra. And then when you get to 9th grade in the high school, we put you in an honors algebra class. And then you continue on to AP, to potentially AP Calc. However, if we think you're not good at math at the end of 6th grade, we just have you do regular 7th grade math, regular 8th grade math, no pre-algebra. And then in 9th grade, you go into CP algebra, not that honors track. And so that really we see that very few children jump tracks, and that's problematic. And who's making that decision in 6th grade versus a much more student-centered decision could be made in 8th or 9th grade versus a teacher making the decision in 6th grade, which, like I said, is probably too early to be making that decision. So there was a proposal on the table. Parents, guardians really did not like that proposal. The superintendent, to her credit, listened intently, and now and I say we, now the administration that brought the original proposal forward is modifying the proposal, and it won't happen this coming fall. The changes will happen the following fall. So we have over a year to continue to tweak and refine and modify.
It gets down to the game of every kid is different, and they progress at different rates, whether you like it or not. And
that's why we have early bloomers and late bloomers.
Yeah, and people change their mind, and kids change their mind of what they're interested in.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it gets to be a challenge as to how do you keep tracking what this kid is doing, and so that at the right time you can say, oh, he's finally got it. And I can remember after I retired, I was teaching for a while, and had an algebra class, 8th grade algebra, and there was this one young lady kept asking me, how do you do that? What are you doing? It kept going around and around, and I kept answering. And then one of the kids in class just got frustrated with it, and he burst out, he's done it 3 times. What are you waiting for? And I was about ready to go slap him upside the head. Then I realized 2 weeks earlier he was doing the same thing.
Right.
So it just mature at a different rate. You catch it at a different rate. I don't know what it is. You say the right thing and it clicks with
Something
them.
clicks,
Say
right,
something else
exactly.
and clunk, goes off.
Right.
But that gets to me one of my other favorites that, yeah, it's nice to be taking calculus, but computers can't do calculus.
That's true. That's very
So
true.
why aren't we teaching linear algebra?
So what I'm going to say to you is that might be coming. So at our most recent curriculum instruction and student life meeting, we heard a presentation from our teachers who are teaching engineering at the high school, and there are some computer science classes being offered. And I think as we look at the math program in conjunction with those other, especially with computer science and engineering, I think that that might be found to be needed. I would say to you that I think that it's at least partially taught in the construct of another class. I don't know because I'm not enrolled in those classes at Beverly High right now, but yeah, we'll see where the proposed changes take us.
Well, the one that always got me about the advantage of a computer is if you try to do anything with matrices by hand,
Right.
it's extremely tedious and you never get there. And you just throw all the numbers into the computer and it spits out an answer.
Right. There's
Which, what the computer is doing internally is a little complicated, but that's some of the thing you need to know. When you're dealing with some of these numbers, where do they come from? How do they get there?
Right, and I will say to you, as part of the math proposal, the superintendent and the school administrators mentioned a particular author in a book, and I picked that book up and I read the entire book, and it's about what makes good math instruction. And so I think that you and I have both lived long enough to have seen the pendulum swing multiple times back and forth. Do we teach math facts? Do we really drill down on math facts versus do we try to move away from that a little bit and talk about applicability? And so when we, for instance, as a school district some number of years ago went to the program called Everyday Math, the idea was that instead of this abstract concept of the number 32, we try to give concrete examples. 32 is the temperature at which you're going to get snow instead of rain.
Yeah.
32 pounds is whatever, right? And so, however, I would assert to you that we went too far away. We swung the pendulum too far away from those rote memorization. And when you understand how the brain actually works, and just like a computer, we have short-term memory and long-term memory. We have working memory. And so I need to have those math facts absolutely drilled into me so that they're automatic, so that then my working memory can be doing the more difficult work of attempting to solve a problem. And so I would assert to you, relative to your matrix example, I absolutely want children to understand the math that goes behind that and to be able to compute it if they had to, but then recognize here's a device that can do it much more quickly, and I therefore understand how to input the data into that device, maybe do a little checking of that data, right, a scientific process of testing, and then say, okay, and now I'm going to let that machine, whatever that device is, do that heavy lifting for me. But you can't do that and trust that and understand that the data coming out of your machine is good if you don't understand the process. Right? So we can't not teach matrices, right? And say, oh, somebody else is going to do it for us.
So that comes down to, what do you expect the kid to have achieved by the time they graduate? And can they work in the real world? And can they understand what's going on in the real world and ask intelligent questions and be able to guess, is that a good answer or not? And
hopefully it's better than just a guess. Hopefully it's an informed decision of whether they're hearing a good answer or not.
But again, you are making a judgment, which is the guess to start off with, and how do you test that judgment to find out that, yeah, it's a good answer, no, it's not. And along the same lines, one of my other pet bugaboos, if you will, is why don't we give students credit for learning a computer language instead of one of the other foreign languages? Because the thing that surprised me is my first trip overseas on a business plane. I was terrified that I had to go to Greece, and how am I going to get to from the airport to the hotel if I can't even say taxi? And you get there and you find out everybody speaks English. So it wasn't the terror that I expected. And one of the things that really surprised me, I was in the breakfast lounge the next morning, and there's this table next to me. I swear they must have been German because it sounded like they were fighting World War III with the kind of thing. And the waitress walks up to them. Instantly, they swung into English and ordered their breakfast. So it got to be less of a problem. So I think understanding being able to talk to a computer is probably more of a challenge these days than talking to somebody from France or Germany or...
Right. So I think that, well, first thing, I don't believe there's any substitution for traveling and for experiencing other cultures. And I hope that our children learn a foreign language and go experience other countries, period, full stop.
Yeah.
Whether they also know how to speak computers. I'm a computer nerd for a living, so I think it's a valuable skill. I think the logic involved in computer science is incredibly important.
Yeah.
That said, what counts as a foreign language is well beyond my purview in the sense that the Department of Ed would have to make that change.
Yeah. But again, it's something that they're not going to make the change because you thought about it. I mean, we're eventually getting into the last subject of
I was just going to say.
Yeah.
that brings us to the other topic
Yeah.
that you said you wanted to talk about. But I think, we can begin, and we should begin, to formulate ideas like that and then maybe experiment with them. And I think a lot of times, why does change happen? Change happens because somebody brings forward, look, this worked. We tried it. We did a pilot. It worked.
Yeah.
And so, becoming ready to go into the work world, I also hope that we really focus on teaching our children to be critical thinkers. Yeah. And as computer science and AI really pick up, our children are going to need to be really that much more diligent about what I just read true?
Yeah.
Is it more based in fact than not?
Yeah. What
are my sources? And are they reputable sources? And that is a whole skill unto itself. And I'll be honest with you, I no longer have any children right here in this beautiful building, but I have had 4 children, and all of my children have learned some amount of that. How do I discern the validity? They've all learned some amount of that while in the Beverly Public Schools, and I think that's fantastic. It's kind of scattered about across different classes.
Well, we get to one of my other favorite subjects is trade schools.
Let's go.
Way back when, I was even president of the board of the trade school one time, but that's long ago. But at one time, Patton Trade School was part of this building, or the building that got torn down. And the career path was relatively straightforward. You take the patent making course in the trade school, spend 4 years learning how to make wooden patents for metal castings. You walk out across the street to the shoe and you got a job.
It's fantastic, right?
And that worked for a lot of people for a long time. And the shoe and patent trade school are both gone. So there's still, I think, a serious interest in some students, what I refer to as people like me who are tactical learners. You got to you got to do something. You make it with your hands, and I think this is one of the things that I think needs more emphasis in this day and age. especially when you get into some of this stuff about students going off to college to get an art degree or something like that. And how many art history majors do we make as the usual cliche?
Yeah, you know, I'm going to tiptoe on that line because I went to school to be a math major and then found computer science. And when I was a math major, I thought I was going to be a math teacher. And I think what I will say is that through my years of being a computer science nerd, I have found a way to kind of wiggle back to what really sparked me in the beginning, which was that I wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah.
So for the last 9 years, what I have done primarily in my role at a tech company is sit with the engineers, understand how the product really works, break it down, spiral and sequence it in order to be able to teach other people. Who am I teaching? I'm teaching the customers who buy the thing, who then want to accomplish some goal with that piece of software. And I'm teaching my salespeople so they can go out and prove the value to someone so that they will come and buy.
What they're selling. Yeah.
So everybody, you need to find that thing that makes you go.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to throw any shade on art history majors,
Okay.
but whether you have a job that, whether you can even find a job, and whether you have a job that pays you a quote-unquote livable wage are two very different things, because if we produce people who can do some task but who are miserable, then that's not a great society either, right? So there's a tiptoe, there's a line there to tiptoe on. But you asked about trade schools, and so the patent wing is quote-unquote before my time. I'm sure you can hear from my accent, and I think you know that I'm not really from around here. However, I've lived here a decent amount of time, and I do know of the patent wing. And as we talked about before the show, we got rid of the patent wing and in return we were told that all the students who wanted to do VoTech could go over to what at the time was called the Essex Aggie.
Yeah.
So we have about 130 students a year who apply to get into, it's now called Essex North Shore Agricultural and Technical, so INSAT. If we take those little shortened letters, we have about 130 students now, on average, who apply, and only about 60 get in each year. So the demand is great. In response to that demand, we have started to do a number of things. And in particular, we have what's called an After Dark program. The name is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Came from the Baker-Polito administration. It's a particular chapter in the Department of Ed. And what happens is the children come here to Beverly High for the first half of the day, including lunch, and then they get on a bus and they go to Essex.
Yeah.
Or they go to Salem. We've recently partnered with Salem High School because they didn't get rid of their VoTech wing.
Oh, okay.
And so our children get a Beverly High diploma, and they get the trade school. So they don't get a whole day of trade school, but they get enough hours in a specific trade to be able to walk out with a certificate of completion in some particular, and I brought some notes with the program, with the listings of the programs at each of those two places, if you want to talk about that. But what I'll say is that that's not all we're doing. All right, so here's the list if we want to talk about that. But that's not all we're doing. We also have recently been certified by the state as a career pathway, and 3 different pathways. And then our last, really 3 weeks ago, we had a curriculum instruction student life meeting where these slides were presented, where we talked about we've been certified in this thing, so we ourselves are offering programming on environmental and life sciences, healthcare and social assistance, business and finance as a career pathway.
Yeah.
You're not going anywhere, you're not getting on a bus to go to any other school. We also offer career pathways in education and hospitality, but right now the state doesn't recognize those. So we were certified for the first 3 that I named to you, and we're looking to get certification moving forward on clean energy, information technology, and manufacturing.
Okay.
So all of those different things, you add the INSAT and the Salem High and these programs, we're giving our children a very nice array of options to learn how to go into a career and walk out of Beverly High prepared to go into that career, or at least to have a jump start. I almost said jump shot. It's NBA season. It's NBA playoff time. To have a real jump start in those careers.
Yeah. So it's a good start, and I think that it recognizes that everybody's different and what their needs are, what the desires are, especially in high school. That's one thing.
Right.
You get some experience in the real world and, we'll do something else because that wasn't much fun after all, kind of thing. But speaking of that kind of stuff, you mentioned the other day that you're going off to get a PhD.
I'm hoping to chase. I'm going to chase a PhD. Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to continue my studies.
Okay. What's the PhD in?
Public policy.
Now that's not something you run on a computer, is it?
No, it's not.
What made you pick that one?
So, a number of years ago, I started working with Harborlight, and I started helping them well before Anchor Point. Let me think where we are. Anchor Point is right up the hill from here, right?
Yeah.
It's the Family Affordable Housing Complex.
Yeah.
So I started working with them kind of in the design phase of what would we want and need to provide the children in that affordable housing complex. We know that, wearing my school committee hat, I'll say we know that children coming out of poverty are behind in school.
Yeah.
And so the concept in the discussions was, how can we try to, quote unquote, make up for that? There are a lot of social science kind of theories that speak to how do we overcome both a weak beginning in schooling, but also a less than stellar inner circle of family.
Yeah.
And so Harborlight put together what I believe is a fantastic group of individuals from different areas, and now they're offering a set of services up there that are just fantastic social services on site to address the whole person and the whole family.
Yeah.
And in doing this, I said to myself, somebody should be studying this, like from a scientific method point of view, and we should be measuring, and do the children coming out of this environment of an incredible support, how do they measure up and how do they do in school compared to children who are living, across the street over there with no such services.
Yeah.
And truth be told, I couldn't find anybody who wanted to study that. So I went and got my master's degree, at least in part, to learn how to do more scientific research, especially in the social services area. And when I sat down with the dean at Endicott College at the time, she said, "You're going to want to keep going and get a PhD." And I laughed at her. Yeah. And about this time last year, when I was graduating out of my master's program, I sent her an email. I said, "Well, I never get tired of hearing that I'm right." And so I'm gonna give you that gift. You were right, and I want to keep going. And now, what do I do next?
Yeah.
And part of it is I want to be more effective at bringing about change. We know that there are things that are like, why aren't we teaching linear algebra? Why don't we have more VoTech?
Yeah.
And yet, human nature is to resist change. So how do we be more effective at bringing forth change? How can we prop it up? How can we support it and say, look, this is proven? How can I make people rest assured you're not gonna lose anything. We're not always in a zero-sum game. And so how do we find those things, and then how do we affect change? And I do believe that at the end of the day, I have come to the realization that affecting change is often best done via policy.
Well, it has to, because somebody's got to pay for it. And who's got the big pockets that they just took a tax bite out of me? Yeah. So, I think you mentioned an important ingredient to this thing is, here, we got this plan, this program that works. how do you get something like that started? And I think that's where another cliche, the rubber hits the road, because somebody can have a lot of good ideas,
Right.
but until somebody actually does it and tries it and says, oh, that didn't quite work, maybe we ought to do this, and maybe we ought to do that, and keep working on this thing. And I keep going back to my engineering trade. You build it and break it and build it and break it kind of thing.
And you learn and you cycle.
And hopefully every time you go through one of these exercises, you get a little bit better. And finally you get to the point.
We hope so, right? We fail forward.
Yeah.
Would be the goal. You learn something from that last failure and you move it to make a little adjustment and you get better.
And I think this is where the challenge is going to be, is how do you get one of these little exercises started? And
yeah, I think that from a innovation point of view, right? I mean, this isn't what's happening at Anchor Point isn't my idea.
no,
And so the folks at Harborlight have this fantastic model, and they do it in multiple locations. This is their first family affordable housing complex where they're applying this model of bringing the services on site. The executive director will be the first person to tell you that any given service might not work. And when if in fact it doesn't work, there are multiple reasons perhaps why it didn't work. Maybe the vendor that they brought in for that particular service wasn't a good vendor. Maybe it wasn't a good fit. Maybe the service was not well aligned with what the residents really needed, et cetera, et cetera. So, all of that, again, all of that should be studied, and it's not so easy as, okay, I have a petri dish and I have a very controlled environment and I could do my scientific experiment.
and either it grows or it doesn't grow.
Right. So this just really, truly intrigues me. And at the end of the day, why did I get on the school committee? Because school was transformational. Public education was transformational for me. My mother didn't even graduate high school. None of my siblings went to college. My parents didn't go to college. And there's a saying that every child needs an adult that's crazy about them, right? And so how do we make that? How do I get that opportunity and make it available to everybody who wants it? And so this idea that we're going to try to take some children out of poverty and give them a great place to live and give them the set of services that will try to close the achievement gap is that's right in my alley. And then I believe that what's going to happen up there is going to work. And then I said to myself, the next logical thing, computer science, is, okay, when it works, how do I stand on a soapbox and jump up and down and say everybody should be doing this?
So how do you go into production and produce lots of them, whatever that is?
And that answer for that topic is public policy.
Yep. And, well, thank you very much. That's about the time we've had. And thank you. I appreciate you stopping by. Would like to have another discussion with you once you get into this a little deeper, because I think this is one of the things that people don't recognize about Harborlight. They're not just building houses.
No, they're not.
And they're not just fighting for low-rent facilities.
Right.
So there's more to it, and I think that's worth talking about.
Absolutely.
And thank you very much.
Thank you for
ladies
having
and
me.
gentlemen, as I mentioned, if you've got any comments, my email address is at the end of the credits. And if you've got some more detailed comments, there's always room for you here at the table. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.